Most people believe they can spot a fake friend. They picture someone who stabs them in the back, someone who lies to their face, someone obviously cruel, obviously selfish, obviously toxic. But here is the disturbing truth that almost no one talks about. The most dangerous form of betrayal doesn't come with a knife. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with conflict or confrontation. It arrives in silence, in small gestures, in subtle shifts so gradual you almost convince yourself you're imagining them. And by the time you finally notice, the damage is already done. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote something that most people are not ready to hear. The most common form of human stupidity is forgetting what one is trying to do. And what he meant, beneath the surface, is this. People become so focused on maintaining the appearance of a friendship that they completely miss the moment it turned against them. Carl Jung said something even more unsettling. He believed that the people closest to us carry a shadow, a hidden side of themselves that even they are unaware of. And when circumstances change, when you grow, when you rise, when your value in their eyes shifts, that shadow begins to reveal itself, not loudly, quietly, strategically. What you are about to discover in this video is not just a list of behaviors. It is a psychological map, a guide to reading the hidden language of disrespect before it swallows you whole. In this video, we will uncover 5 things fake friends do when they no longer respect you, decoded through the lens of Nietzsche, Stoicism, Carl Jung, and the darkest truths of human psychology. Watch until the end, because the 5th one is the one most people never see coming. The first sign is so subtle that most people rationalize it away for months, sometimes years. Your friend stops showing up, not dramatically, not all at once. They just drift. The calls become shorter. The replies take longer. The plans get canceled more often than they're kept. And yet, they never officially disappear. They still like your posts. They still send a message on your birthday. They still call themselves your friend, if anyone asks. Most people interpret this as life getting busy, as adult responsibilities, as the natural evolution of friendship. And sometimes that is true. But here is what psychology reveals underneath that comfortable explanation. When a person loses respect for someone, they rarely have the courage or the awareness to end the relationship outright. Instead, they do something far more psychologically calculated. They begin a slow withdrawal. They reduce their investment without reducing the label. They keep the friendship alive just enough to avoid confrontation, just enough to preserve the social image of being a good person, while simultaneously moving their emotional energy somewhere else. Psychologists call this emotional divestment. It is the process of quietly pulling back the resources of time, attention, and presence from a relationship you no longer value, while keeping the outer shell intact. Why do they do this? Because cutting someone off requires a level of honesty they cannot access. It requires them to confront the uncomfortable truth about how they feel. And most people would rather let something quietly rot than have an honest conversation about it. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "Confine yourself to the present." What he understood was that the clearest truth about any relationship is not what was promised in the past. It is what is happening right now. And right now, if someone is consistently not choosing you, that is not an accident. That is information. The person who used to call you every week now replies with a 3-word text 3 days later. The person who once made plans in advance now only has time for you when it is convenient for them. You have not changed the rules of the friendship. They have. They just have not told you. Here is the insight you need to carry with you. Respect expresses itself through consistent effort. The moment effort disappears, but the label remains, you are no longer a friend to them. You are a convenience. Pay very close attention to this one, because this sign is wrapped in language that sounds perfectly reasonable on the surface. So reasonable, in fact, that the person doing it can deny it with a clear conscience. And yet, beneath the surface, it is one of the most psychologically revealing behaviors a human being can display. When something good happens in your life, a promotion, a relationship, a personal breakthrough, a creative success, watch closely how your so-called friend responds. Not what they say. Watch how they say it. Do they celebrate you, or do they instantly shrink it? Do they meet your excitement with their own, or do they find the flaw, the risk, the reason to be cautious? Do they say, "That's amazing," and mean it? Or do they say, "That's great, but," and then spend the next 10 minutes outlining why it might not last? And then notice what happens when things go wrong in your life, when you fail, when you struggle, when you are uncertain. Do they seem somehow more comfortable, more engaged, more present? Does the conversation suddenly feel more natural, as if difficulty is the context where they finally feel at ease with you? This dynamic has a name in psychology. It is called benign envy, when it is relatively harmless, and malicious envy, when it has turned into something corrosive. And it is one of the most ancient features of human social behavior. Nietzsche had a word for this energy: ressentiment. It was one of his most profound psychological concepts, and it describes the quiet, festering resentment that builds in people who feel they cannot compete, who feel that your success somehow diminishes them, who secretly measure their worth against yours, and feel threatened by what they find. These people do not hate you. That would be too simple. What they feel is something more complicated and more painful. They cannot fully celebrate you because doing so requires them to confront the gap between where you are and where they are. And that gap, imagined or real, is something they haven't yet learned to sit with. So instead, they unconsciously work to narrow it, not by rising, but by minimizing, by casting doubt, by reminding you of your limitations at precisely the moment you feel most alive. Carl Jung called this the shadow at work in relationships, the part of a person they cannot consciously own, their insecurity, their envy, their wounded pride, gets projected outward, and it lands on you in the form of a tone, a hesitation, a well-timed piece of skepticism disguised as just being honest. Think about someone in your life right now. Think about the last time you shared good news with them. Did you feel lifted? Or did you leave the conversation feeling slightly deflated, slightly smaller, like you had to defend something you should have been allowed to simply enjoy? That feeling is data. The deepest sign of respect in any relationship is the ability to celebrate someone else's light without feeling threatened by it. When that ability disappears, so has the respect. This one cuts deep because it exposes not just how they feel about you, but who they truly are. There is a version of this person that only you see, the version that is warm, engaged, sometimes even vulnerable, the version that calls you when they need something, that laughs with you in private, that treats you with a certain level of familiarity. And then there is the version that appears when an audience arrives. Around others, especially people they want to impress, something shifts. Maybe they talk over you. Maybe they dismiss your opinion in a group setting after privately agreeing with you hours before. Maybe they make subtle jokes at your expense. Nothing cruel enough to be called out, but precise enough to land. Maybe they simply do not include you in the conversation the same way. They turn their body toward the more important people in the room. They direct their energy elsewhere, and you become, in that moment, invisible. This is not accidental. This is the most honest moment you will ever witness in a fake friendship. In private, when there is no social capital to manage, they treat you one way. In public, when status is on the line, the mask slips, and you see exactly how they have categorized you in their internal social hierarchy. The Stoics were deeply aware of this dynamic. Epictetus, who was born a slave and became one of the most profound philosophers in history, understood that most human behavior is not about the relationship in front of them. It is about the audience behind them. He taught his students to observe not what people say about their values, but what their behavior reveals when something is at stake. What is at stake in this moment? Their image, their social positioning, their desire to be perceived as important, successful, or elevated. And if associating with you fully, in public, in front of the people who matter to them, if that association does not serve that image, they will quietly subtract you from it. This is not cruelty, not consciously. It is something more primitive. It is the social animal in them calculating, in real time, what serves their position in the tribe. And you, in that calculation, have been assigned a lower value than you deserve. Here is what makes this sign so important to understand. The person who respects you does not have two versions of themselves around you. They do not turn up your volume in private and your mute in public. They speak of you with the same warmth, whether you are standing beside them or nowhere near the room. If someone treats you like a guest in private and an afterthought in public, they have never truly seen you at all. This one is counterintuitive, and it is the one that the most emotionally perceptive people in the world miss the most often. When someone loses respect for you, they do not always become meaner. Sometimes, and this is the twist that almost no one sees coming, they become nicer, more agreeable, more pleasant, less likely to challenge you, less likely to confront you, less likely to give you the kind of honest feedback that once defined your dynamic, and it feels good, until you realize what it actually means. In the early stages of a genuine friendship, there is friction, there is honesty, there is the willingness to say, "I think you're wrong about this," or "That decision worries me," or "I have to be real with you about something." That friction is not disrespect. That friction is intimacy. It is the proof that someone cares enough about your growth to risk your discomfort. When respect disappears, so does the friction. Because to challenge someone requires you to believe they are capable of handling it. To be honest with someone requires you to care about the outcome of their life. And when someone has quietly written you off, when they have emotionally moved on from the investment, they stop bothering to be real with you. What is the point? The relationship, in their internal world, is already over. You are just the last to know, so they agree with you. They tell you what you want to hear. They smile and nod and offer hollow encouragement. And it feels like peace. But it is actually abandonment. Carl Jung wrote about the concept of the persona, the mask we wear for the social world. And he warned that when relationships become purely about persona management, when both parties are performing rather than connecting, they have lost the core of what makes them real. What you are experiencing when someone stops being honest with you is the final stage of that process. They are no longer present with you in any meaningful psychological sense. They are simply maintaining the form of a friendship, the shell, while the substance has long since evaporated. Think about the last difficult conversation a true friend had with you, the kind that was uncomfortable, the kind that stung a little, the kind that you eventually realized was the most loving thing anyone could have said. Now think about the person in your life who only ever agrees with you, who never pushes back, who always says, "You're right," and "That sounds great," and "Whatever you think is best." Ask yourself honestly, are they being kind, or have they simply stopped caring enough to tell you the truth? The moment someone stops being honest with you is the moment they have stopped believing in you. Honesty is the last gift a genuine person gives. When it disappears, so have they. This is the one. This is the sign that lives deepest in the shadows, the one that does the most damage, and the one that people most often turn inward and use against themselves. Because this sign does not announce itself as cruelty. It announces itself as your own problem. You reach out during a difficult moment, and they respond with a subtle impatience. Not enough to call out, just enough to feel. You share something vulnerable, and the conversation shifts back to them within 60 seconds. You express a need for time, for support, for presence, and something in their tone, in their body language, in the way they look at you makes you feel that you have asked for too much, that you are too much. And here is the most dangerous part of this dynamic. You begin to believe it. You start pre-editing yourself before you speak to them. You begin to wonder if your problems are too heavy, your emotions too messy, your needs too inconvenient. You minimize yourself in the presence of someone who was supposed to be your ally. And you call it self-awareness. You call it not wanting to be a burden. But what is actually happening is that someone else's disrespect has become your internal voice. This is what psychologists describe as emotional gaslighting in its subtlest form. Not the dramatic, obvious kind. The kind that happens so gently, so repeatedly, in such small doses, that you cannot trace it back to the source. You just know that you started this friendship feeling seen, and now you feel like an inconvenience. Nietzsche understood this dynamic with terrifying precision. He observed that one of the cruelest things one human being can do to another is to make them ashamed of their own existence. Not through confrontation, through implication, through the sustained, subtle communication that your presence requires more tolerance than it brings joy. The Stoics had an answer for this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect." And the modern Stoic interpretation of this is direct. Any relationship that requires you to make yourself smaller in order to maintain it is not a relationship worth maintaining. A person who respects you does not make you perform emotional gymnastics before you can speak your truth. A person who respects you does not make you feel apologetic for being human. A person who respects you holds space. Not perfectly. No one does. But consistently. With patience. With the simple, radical act of showing up. If you are currently managing your realness around someone to avoid making them uncomfortable, if you are measuring your words, hiding your struggles, pretending to be lighter than you are, please hear this. That is not a friendship. That is a performance. And you are the only one paying the entrance fee. The person who makes you feel like a burden for having needs has revealed the truth. They do not see your humanity as worthy of their care. And no friendship without that care deserves your loyalty. Now let us go deeper. Because the real question is not just what these people do. The real question is why. Why do human beings behave this way? Why do people who once called you their friend begin to quietly dismantle the relationship through these invisible behaviors? The answer lives in the intersection of ego, fear, and social hierarchy. And understanding it will not just help you recognize these patterns, it will protect you from being destroyed by them. At the core of every one of these behaviors is insecurity. Not the kind that people wear on the surface, but the deep structural kind. The kind Carl Jung called a wound in the psyche. The kind that forms early, often in childhood, in families and environments where worth was conditional, where love had to be earned, where position in the group determined your value. People who carry that wound into adulthood are constantly, often unconsciously, managing their social standing. They are calculating in every relationship, in every room, where they stand relative to others. And when someone close to them begins to shift, begins to grow, to evolve, to succeed, to demand more from life, something primal gets triggered, because your growth is an implicit challenge, not because you intend it to be, but because in the internal economy of an insecure person, someone rising means someone else is falling. That is the unconscious math. It is not logical, it is not true, but it governs behavior with extraordinary power. And so the fake friend begins to manage you. They pull back their energy, not because they want to hurt you, but because your presence has become uncomfortable for them. They minimize your wins, not because they are evil, but because your wins feel like a mirror, showing them something they cannot bear to look at. They perform for audiences, not because they are calculating, but because their sense of self is so dependent on external perception that any relationship that doesn't serve that perception must be quietly managed. They stop being honest, because honesty requires care, and care requires presence. And presence costs too much when they are already emotionally overdrawn, and they make you feel like a burden, because your needs remind them of their own needs, and their own needs remind them of their own wounds, and their own wounds are the thing they have spent their entire life trying to escape. This does not make their behavior acceptable. It does not mean you owe them grace at the expense of yourself, but understanding it changes something important. It removes the personal quality of the wound. What they did to you, it was never really about you. It was always about the war they are fighting inside themselves. Now the question becomes practical. You have seen the signs. You understand the psychology. What do you actually do? The answer is not revenge. The answer is not confrontation for its own sake. The Stoics and Nietzsche agreed on this much. Responding from a place of wounded pride is always a mistake. It gives power to the very dynamic you are trying to escape. Here is what wisdom actually prescribes. First, observe without immediately reacting. When you notice these patterns emerging, do not confront them in the heat of the moment. Give yourself the distance to see them clearly. Confirmation takes time. Patterns reveal themselves through repetition. Watch. Learn. Then decide. Second, stop over-explaining yourself to people who have already made up their mind about you. One of the most exhausting habits of people in disrespecting relationships is the compulsion to prove their worth, to explain, to justify, to argue for their own value. But here is the truth. A person who respects you does not require that performance. Save your energy. Your worth is not something you negotiate with others. It is something you know. Third, set boundaries not as punishment, but as information. A boundary is not a wall built in anger. It is a clear, calm communication of what you will and will not accept. I'm not available for that. That does not work for me. I need something different from this relationship. These are not ultimatums. They are the language of self-respect, and how someone responds to a boundary tells you everything you need to know about whether they deserve continued access to you. Fourth, redirect your energy toward what is growing, not what is dying. Every hour you spend managing a relationship that has quietly turned against you is an hour stolen from the relationships that are still alive, still generative, still worthy of your investment. Protect your attention like it is currency, because it is. Fifth, let the relationship find its natural level without forcing it. Not every friendship ends with a confrontation. Some simply adjust. When you stop over-investing in someone who has stopped investing in you, the relationship will either find a new honest equilibrium or it will fade. Either outcome is better than the slow drain of a fake friendship maintained by your effort alone. There is a reason this conversation feels urgent in 2024 and beyond. We are living in an era of unprecedented social comparison. Social media has built an architecture, not of connection, but of performance. Every life is a highlight reel. Every success is amplified for an audience. Every person is quietly measuring themselves against the curated version of everyone else, and coming up short. And what this has done to human relationships is devastating. It has made envy invisible and constant. It has made authenticity rare and radical. It has created an entire generation of people who have mistaken the performance of friendship for the experience of it. The attention economy profits from your insecurity. It profits from your desire to be seen, validated, compared. And in that environment, genuine human loyalty, the kind that does not waver when you are struggling, the kind that celebrates you without a hidden cost, has become almost revolutionary. The fake friendships described in this video are not a new phenomenon, but they are more sophisticated now. They have learned the language of emotional intelligence and weaponized it. They say, "I'm just being honest," while being unkind. They say, "I'm here for you," while making themselves perpetually unavailable. They have mastered the performance of caring, while quietly withholding the substance of it. This is why developing genuine psychological literacy, the ability to read behavior beneath language, to feel the weight of what is not said, to track the patterns beneath the gestures, is one of the most important skills you can build in the modern world. Not to become paranoid, not to treat every relationship as a threat, but to become discerning. To know the difference between the people who energize you and the people who drain you. To choose your circle with the same care and intentionality that you would want them to choose you. Let us bring this back to you. If you recognized yourself in any of these signs, not as the one doing them, but as the one on the receiving end, I want you to hear something clearly. What happened to you was not a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of someone else's capacity. There is a profound difference between being someone who is hard to love and being someone who was loved by people whose capacity for love was limited. Most of what we carry as self-doubt, as unworthiness, as the quiet belief that we are somehow too much or not enough, most of that was handed to us by people who could not give us what we deserved. And we, in our loyalty, in our hope, in our very human desire to be chosen, took it on as our own. The Stoics taught that the only things truly within our control are our own judgments, our own desires, and our own actions. Everything else, including how others choose to treat us, is ultimately outside our domain. This is not a passive teaching. It is a liberating one, because it means that your value has never been determined by whether someone else could see it. Nietzsche wrote something that has echoed through centuries. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often, and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. Owning yourself. That is the ultimate answer to the fake friend. Not bitterness, not isolation, not the performance of not caring. Owning yourself means knowing what you bring to this world clearly enough that you no longer need it confirmed by people who are too threatened by it to say so. It means building a life so rooted in your own values, your own vision, your own genuine relationships, that the withdrawal of someone who never truly showed up barely registers against the fullness of what you are building. The 5 signs we explored today: the withdrawal of effort, the minimizing of your wins, the two-faced performance for audiences, the disappearance of honesty, and the slow suffocation of your needs, all of them are pointing at the same thing. They are pointing at the threshold between who you were and who you are becoming. Because in every case, The fake friend's disrespect is activated by your growth, by your refusal to stay small, by the uncomfortable evidence of your potential, which means that the very thing they cannot tolerate in you is the best thing about you. Do not shrink to fit their comfort. Do not dim your light to soothe their shadow. Do not trade the fullness of who you are for the hollow maintenance of a relationship that has quietly already ended. Move forward. Choose the relationships that can hold your full weight. Build the life that reflects your actual values. And let the people who couldn't rise to meet you, let them stay exactly where they are. As Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself in the quiet of his own journal, written not for an audience, but for the fortification of his own soul, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And today, you have found it.